Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a while and apologize. We apologize. We've just had a lot going on. I've had a lot going on in my personal life. Some of you might have heard. And then I've been traveling as well a lot. And so we weren't able to get together, but hopefully we're going to pick it up now as things get a little bit more settled. And of course, there has been the ongoing US war against Iran, where, Donald Trump has numerous times declared himself a winner, whereas Iran has said the complete opposite. There's been renewed tensions in Latin America in terms of the US Israeli Zionist takeover of Latin America, which is well underway after Peru and Colombia's elections went towards the US far right and the Zionists. And coming in, of course, is Brazil next. So we're going to take a look at that. But of course, we're going to be starting off with Vanessa's side of the region in West Asia. Apart from what's happening with Iran and Lebanon and everything going on in the region recently, Syria, of course, has come into the picture with some people taking surprising or not so surprising focus on Bashar al-Assad as the problem, when in reality, of course, we know that Zionists moving into Syria was always part of the plan. This was always part of the ultimate goal. And so here we are, and it's happening. And the decision to focus on Assad in this time is just perplexing to me. There's so much to talk about Syria, which, by the way, the violence and brutality because of Jelani and his cohorts never stopped. It's been ongoing this entire time, just because it hasn't been on the front of the news headlines. But Vanessa, why don't you take us through this and what's been happening there, and I guess I would say the connections to everything that happened that led to the fall of Syria, that are now, a lot of things are coming out, and I have to say it proving you correct in a lot of the assessments you made that made very many people quite upset.
Yeah, there is a lot of information coming to light now, which is kind of normal. People are feeling more secure. They're feeling more able to actually speak about what happened. And very recently, there has been another additional piece of information that has been published on a Telegram channel. It's not been given to me privately, but because I follow certain channels, because I know who's actually running them. Effectively, the information that is coming out is supporting what I believe happened, which was that Russia was definitely involved in the handover of Syria to Jolani and Assad al-Shaibani, the two. There were more, but at least two of the co-founders of Nusra Front, or Al-Qaeda, in Syria. And I guess without sort of going too deep into that bunny hole right now, I will be writing up all of the information that I have, including the new information, including all of the historical links and agreements between particularly Putin and Netanyahu. The contradiction between general staff agendas in Syria and Putin's agendas in Syria, because of his very strong relationship with Netanyahu and with Israel generally. But we're in a situation, I guess, where it's all been kicked up again, because it was announced from the Syrian side, so from the Al-Qaeda regime side, that there was now a memorandum of understanding between Syria and Russia. When Syria actually fell, there were reports both from Assad al-Shaibani, the now foreign minister, and Jolani, that they had made an agreement with Russia at the Bab al-Hawa crossing, which is the remaining humanitarian border that Russia kept open between Turkey and Syria, even though they knew that it was allowing weapons into Jolani's militia, it was allowing Ukrainian special forces to enter Syria, and it was providing revenue for HTS. How do I know that? I know that they knew this. I actually contacted the UN, the Russian mission in New York, and they told me the reason that they didn't shut the corridor down was because they wanted to keep tabs on Turkey and the EU and the UK, because they knew that they were basically smuggling weapons and so on and equipment into Jolani, which is kind of nonsense. If they knew it, they didn't need to document it any further. They should have actually vetoed the keeping open of the corridor, but that's just another kind of detail in the much bigger story. And so we know that once Jolani took power, there was a rush by Russia to normalize relations with Jolani in order to maintain control of the naval berth at the Tartus naval base, and also to maintain control over the Homomim military base and air base, because as John Helmer, I was talking to him today, pointed out, you can't have a naval base unless you've got an air base to be able to bring equipment in for the naval vessels. Now, during the Assad era, Russia had almost complete autonomy in those areas. It had complete diplomatic immunity. There were no custom payments on any goods that Russia brought in. It could dock up to 11 ships at one time, warships at one time at Tartus, including nuclear-powered vessels. The Tartus agreement was basically infinite. It could be cancelled by either party with a year's notice, but otherwise it would just be a rolling agreement. In Homomim, it was a 49-year agreement, and then it would automatically renew for 25 years. So not only did they have full sovereignty in those areas and diplomatic immunity, they effectively had a lifetime guarantee of security and stability from President Assad. The latest memorandum of understanding with Jolani is very different. So basically, the military base will now be a joint training base. So in other words, it will be half occupied by HTS. The airport will go back to civilian ownership and control, as will Tartus port, if I remember correctly. So effectively, and of course, at the same time, you have Turkey circling, you have France circling, you have Ukrainian forces inside Syria again, just as they were in 2023 and 2024. You have Chechen elements within Jolani's militia who very clearly would like to have their revenge over Russia and the bombing campaigns led against the Chechen terrorists during the Assad era. So in my opinion, and how I interpret this, Russia is in danger of losing a very important sphere of influence in Syria, which gives it access to Africa. It has already attempted to establish a Red Sea base in Sudan, which has been kiboshed by Trump, who has threatened Burhan and Sudan with basically sanctions and putting it back on the terrorist list, and et cetera, et cetera. So that entire project has been frozen, and it would not have been as secure as Syria anyway. And in my opinion, the deal was done and very much accepted by Russia, although there haven't been any official statements so far, as a guarantee, because Russia is now under threat from Turkey. Turkey, of course, is supplying missiles to Ukraine. And it definitely wants the Syrian coast as part of the Mavi Vatan doctrine, which is control of the Eastern Mediterranean maritime corridor, the Black Sea potentially, and the Aegean Sea, which of course then brings it into conflict with Greece. But the Ukrainian forces now in Syria, the Chechen forces under the control of Jolani, I think Russia is scrambling to try and maintain the base in whatever form it can. And I think it's also looking for guarantees from Jolani, perhaps in exchange for supplying weapons, selling them weapons, which was always a sort of a caveat of their remaining in Syria from the very beginning. And even Trump, I think, made a couple of references to the fact that Jolani can buy his weapons from Russia, not from the US. So anyway, I think I'll stop there and just get your comment on that, because otherwise there's so much going on inside Syria that I'll just keep talking.
Well, I think of the question, from like if I'm coming at it from an outsider perspective, is how could Russia be working with the people that were killing them and working against them, and with the very forces that were going after them for so long, unless they were essentially forced to or had no other choice, right? So if that is the case, if Russia is trying to save itself, essentially trying to latch on to what little power and influence it has in the region, then that tells you that the analysis that we're getting from most, analysts and geopolitical analysts who are, into multipolarity, or coming at it from the Russia perspective, is flawed, because all we're getting from them is that Russia is successful, and that everything is going well for them, and that this war is won by them, and this and that. But if this is true, if what you're saying is accurate, which I think it is based on everything that I've seen myself, then they are not in the position of a victory. They're in a position of retreat. They're in a position of scrambling. They're in a position of trying to maintain hold of what they have, and feeling and understanding that they're very vulnerable in this moment. And that's what I've been seeing on my end happening in Russia, and their influence. And I know this isn't really about Russia that we're talking right now, but I do think the region plays a very important role as to how a lot of this will play out in terms of NATO, in terms of what happens with Russia, Ukraine, and who gets what in the region.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. The fact that Ukrainian forces are present in Syria, they're present in Iraq, trying to set up false flags to effectively create internal conflict between the state and the resistance actors in Iraq, to keep the focus inside Iraq rather than giving the resistance actors the space to be able to move and potentially enter Syria should Jolani attack Lebanon and the resistance in Lebanon, which is still very much on the table at the moment, because Iran basically threatened Jolani that if he goes ahead with any attack, which means that there was a potential for it, any attack against Hezbollah, then they have listed more than 100 strategic targets inside Syria, which will be hit, including the presidential palace in Damascus, which of course is home to many of the International Intelligence Agency operatives like the MI6, who are working from the presidential palace to continue coaching and grooming Jolani and his henchmen to be able to deal with the international community such as it is. So that's number one. So in other words, the Ukrainian war is expanding into Russia's other spheres of influence. The fact that they targeted an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea 3 days before Zelensky met with Trump, and the Caspian Sea is historically a safe zone for both Russia and Iran to be able to cooperate, particularly with supply of drones, of course, from Iran to Russia. That's number one. And then number two, you've got the expansion of Ukraine into Africa. There have been attacks from 2023 onwards against Russian PMC forces, formerly Wagner, now Africa Corps, in Mali and in Sudan. So, what is NATO doing? It's basically deploying Ukrainian forces as the new proxy that gives the NATO member states plausible deniability for any attacks, either against Iran and its allies or against Russia in its zones of influence. So Russia is effectively facing sustained attack in multiple arenas. Although it's not full-blown war, it's being basically put under pressure in those areas. We know that it's already, to a degree, lost its sphere of influence in Armenia, for example. Now Putin is trying to strong-arm Pashinyan and put pressure on him to divorce from the EU, Trump, Israel, Turkey, and come back to the Russian sphere of influence. But it's kind of too little, too late. And whether Russia deliberately let Syria go, or whether, again, because I had this conversation with John Helmer today, whether it is simply that it isn't capable at the moment of taking on multiple projections of power with the Ukraine war because of the corruption within the military that needs to be sorted out, just as Putin kind of dragged the country out of the Yeltsin era disaster. What the Ukraine war demonstrated, and speaking from a personal experience in Syria, I was being told by Russian intel people and military that it was going to be a disaster because they were not aware of the level of corruption. For example, the drones. Putin had been told for years that there were massive stocks of drones. The reality is there weren't, right? Which is one reason that the Iranian drones became so important. So I think what we're actually seeing is Syria was in a way the tip of the iceberg. Syria was the visible part of Russia's vulnerability in the area of power projection. It doesn't really have a soft power complex. It's not like China. China is expanding through soft power very successfully. Russia doesn't really have that. It's actually reliant on hard power or the oligarchs. And with the oligarchs comes corruption. That's already failed. Using the oligarchs as a kind of vanguard of Russian interests has not been extremely successful. So they've sort of fallen back on hard power, as we're seeing in Central Africa, in the Sahel, and so on. But there's only a certain extent to which that can continue, in my opinion. And in Syria, for example, they're up against Turkey, Israel, Iran. Of course, Russia was not keen on Iranian influence inside Syria. And that's one of the reasons that Israel was effectively given a green light to bomb Iranian positions and even Hezbollah positions during the regime change war as part of the deconfliction agreement between Putin and Netanyahu. They're very dependent on Turkey to bypass American sanctions. They're very dependent on Turkey if they lose Syria, because they will need, if they want to use Libya as a base, for example, Turkey is actually dominant in the north of Libya, as far as I understand. If people have a different impression, please let me know. So wherever they move at the moment, Turkey is very crucial to their ability to survive right now. And that's not a good position for them to be in. Either Turkey or, of course, China, because you've got the Eastern grain train corridor. You've got the polar corridor. And you've got the China, Mongolia, Russia corridor. The North-South trade corridor, of course, has been kind of put back, and they're now having to negotiate with Afghanistan because of the increased influence of Trump and Israel and Turkey in Azerbaijan and Armenia and France, actually, and Britain. So like basically the door has been open to pretty much all of NATO and Israel combined. in the South Caucasus as well, which is a very dangerous position for Russia to be in, because the focus is on NATO expanding east. It's not on NATO expanding to the south.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really not looking good for Russia on those terms. And I think a lot of people are just hyper focused on what they're getting from a lot of the government, state-sponsored announcements and the drone. Uh, that itself, the fact that they didn't have as many drones as Putin was told. There's a lot of things Putin has been told that aren't true. And on my end too, there have been documented cases of corruption coming from Russians themselves, people who have gone to the front and have seen this corruption. It's not coming from just Ukrainian channels or pro-NATO channels.
No,
It's
no.
coming from actual Russians that are putting this information out there and saying there's just so much corruption. And we saw part of that with the uprising before. From the Wagner leader before Prigozhin,
Prigozhin,
Yevgeny
yeah.
Prigozhin,
Yeah.
before he was killed or whatever. So we've seen bits of it, but I think, there's still so much that people haven't really accepted in these terms. And what we're looking at isn't just going to be this sort of, I think, old school World War II type of scenario. We're seeing there are multiple wars that are basically connected, right? And they're all kind of operating, and we're not calling them a major global war, but they are in a sense all part of coming from the same people. They're coming from the United States, NATO, Israel, waging them on Russia, on the resistance. And the thing is, Russia seems to me have been trying to play it pragmatically. As we said, they've been trying to play it, well, we're just going to go and expand and look at our own interests. But when you do that, sometimes your own interests fall in between these the objectives of those that are waging the war. So Russia has to negotiate with people that would it normally maybe not want to negotiate with. And it's what it's allowed itself to try to play both sides, or not even both, but many sides, to try to be the character that is able to work with anybody. And the danger in that is at some point there isn't going to be some a state that is loyal enough to you, because you don't have that kind of influence, that kind of power. It's extremely reliant on China as well for the imports. And its relationship with China isn't an equal relationship. It's a lopsided one where China holds far more power. So it doesn't really have that global influence that people who are promoting, the idea of BRICS and multipolarity have been led to believe that Russia is the super powerful. I think it had an opportunity to make certain moves earlier, and now what we're seeing the West Asia kind of show us exactly how things really truly are, and where we can see them move further down the line, especially in regard to Russia, in regard to Eurasia in general, which is the goal of NATO has been to balkanize Russia. And I think, as you said, they've lost influence with the area, Armenia and Azerbaijan. That
Former
influence
Soviet
has been
Union,
lost
yeah.
from the former Soviet republic. So now, as it's losing that, now it's a perfect opportunity for basically pressuring Russia into submission, or dragging out the war until they have nothing left to fight. And I think that's the tactic that we're seeing right now, the pressuring, forcing Russia to choose to make concessions. And I think they already are making concessions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in, I know we've kind of diverted onto Russia, but this is an interesting topic, and it kind of impacts onto the whole regional global war anyway, because it's connected to Iran and how reliable of an ally will Russia be going forward.
Yeah.
And I think one of the problems is having committed itself to the war. I'm not going to call it an SMO, to the war in Ukraine, having failed to achieve military deterrence. And perhaps one could say Putin was not aware of the level of corruption in the military, hence why Shoigu was taken out. Many of his kind of sub-generals were also, I think 5 or 6 were removed, but Shoigu's still around. I mean, he's still in the administration, which suggests that the military needs an overhaul. Certainly corruption was very prevalent in Syria, both from the Russian military elements that were there, but especially from Wagner. The fact that Putin is being criticized for creating the red lines and then allowing them to be crossed and not achieving the desired deterrence against NATO member states, when you've got Ukraine attacking, deep inside Russian territory and attacking civilian infrastructure, attacking tourist areas, oil facilities, oil infrastructure, essential energy infrastructure. It starts to become really dangerous internally for both Putin and for Russia itself. And then when, this war is acting as a testbed, really, for those that are looking towards Russia for an alliance of some kind or a partnership of some kind. And when they can see long-term allies like Syria, what happened there, whether it was deliberate, whether they simply couldn't extend to that extent because of the issues with the military and multiple other issues also that were ongoing with Israel, with Turkey, and so on. But Iran has to be looking at that, right? And hence why I think Iran has a policy of strategic independence anyway. India has to be looking at it, even Israel to some degree. Israel, as soon as it sees a weakness, it sees an opportunity. Turkey, as I said, is becoming more and more bold in actually going against Russia, particularly in Ukraine. And again, it's a NATO member state. Even the fact that Erdogan was talking about reselling the Russian S-400s in order to come back into the F-35 program, I think to some degree that's a bit of a smokescreen. I think the guarantees that Trump gave were for Turkey to have a sphere of influence in Lebanon if they would give the green light to the Turkish proxies under the control of Giuliani to attack Lebanon if it comes to that. But, there's a lot of maneuvering going on. And I guess my feeling is, not having achieved deterrence in the Ukraine war theater, despite all of the kind of YouTube podcast accounts that are saying Russia has been winning from day one, I'm not convinced. Because we're not dealing with Ukraine, we're dealing all of the NATO member states. And when you have a country like Estonia that feels empowered enough to tell China to stop dealing with Russia, that's an indication of how little deterrence Russia has actually achieved, even in the smaller NATO member states. So I guess, my worry is, has Russia overextended too soon, based on assurances that Putin had received that the military was ready for it? And if they're not ready for it, and basically the military needs a major overhaul, it can't then be overextended into other areas where Russia wants to guarantee a sphere of influence. While, as I said, China is building up spheres of influence through soft power, not through hard power, not through military power.
I guess my question is, where does Iran? Iran is, as you said, looking at this, and and taking note. But where does the U.S. war against Iran now continue? I think we're going to see this because of this whole month that I've been sort of gone. I've seen the back and forth of the same type of uh, announcements from the White House about how the war is
Mm.
won, and then the same type of back and forth. No, it isn't. And then there hasn't really. There's been this tit for tat. There's been this back and forth, but I haven't seen a resolution. And I don't. I think people want to see like a very nicely tied present gift with a bow that says, "Okay, the war is done." That's not how things
It's not
are
going to happen.
happening. That's not where we're at. This is a long-term conflict that we're seeing, and it's part of a bigger push by the United States and Zionists. I would call them, you know, the United States of Epstein and all of these cohorts. But I think what we're seeing is fatigue from people trying not being able to analyze this because for them it's like, well, it's not happening like a normal war would, right? We're not seeing the end of the Ukraine war. We're not seeing the end of the war between the United States and Iran. It's just sort of pauses and then goes back up, pauses and then goes back up. So people don't know how to analyze this. And if you look at it as just these very defined lines of beginning and end, you're not going to be able to analyze this properly. You have to understand that this is like a continuous wave and that these are lit- conflicts and battles within a bigger war.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you look at this, because if we're going to be just expecting for things to, you know, kind of resolve themselves like this, that's not where we're at right now. And I think it's been difficult for people to understand this because we are used to seeing things more defined in history books, more defined. Oh, this was World War II. This was World War One. This was, you know, the War of 1812. This was it's
Yeah.
but that's not even really how it happened either. Because things it's
Mm.
not like it's like a push, you push a button and then you push another button. When you experience this in reality, you understand that these things don't really ever end. Even the Cold War, you could say, did it really end? If look at where we're at now, right? It's
Mm.
there's so many things that I think have to be reassessed and relearned in terms of how we look at geopolitical conflicts and war. And I think that's a huge problem as to why I get frustrated with the way things are conducted. Like, oh, Iran did this. Oh, the US said this. It's like that's just it's just so very much like it's being pushed out in what this day is like headlines, right? Just headlines and whatever gets most clicks, but it doesn't really
Mm.
have a necessary layer of assessment to understand where this is going, where we go from here. Sorry, it's just my
Yeah, and no,
venting
no.
my
I mean,
frustration.
I agree completely, and I think I'd be interested to get your opinion. You know, having lived in Russia and worked there and so on. But I almost have a sense that Russia itself is kind of stuck in a time warp. I
Mm,
have the sense that it is still looking at the world through a relatively out of date lens, where hard power can project influence. Whereas if you look, I've mentioned China, but even if you look at the Zionist movement, how that is now expanding into virtually every country in the Balkans. They're attempting settlement in various areas of Italy, Greece, Cyprus, pretty much everywhere. You know, Africa, many of the countries in Africa now are basically doing business with Israel, who are providing health services, education, AI data centers, as in Albania and various other countries also, Cyprus, Greece. We've had the multitude of wildfires that in many countries are being blamed on Israel. I haven't seen any kind of hard proof yet, but I'm certainly not going to totally disbelieve it. And yet I kind of look at Russia and I see that it hasn't really changed its strategy. That it's still stuck in this kind of, well, if we can militarily help out, then that will give us a secure footing for the future. Whereas in reality, is Israel coming in through the back door and selling them AI tech and defense technology and, as I said, education, healthcare, and so on? And so by the time Russia has expended its kind of military support, then what is left? Because all of the industry, all of the civilian infrastructure is kind of already occupied. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm just kind of also thinking out loud here.
Yeah. I mean, I think if anybody is vulnerable to Israel taking over, I think with Russia, you would see the takeover by the United States and
Yeah.
NATO facilitated entirely by Israel because there's already an Israeli influence in Russia, not just by the Chabad Lubavitch, but also by the oligarch class that
Yeah.
is in Russia, and also um, the cauldron that Russia is in, because there's a cauldron that's brewing, is dissatisfaction from the general public right now with the war in Ukraine, how long it's lasted, what the fact that the city of Moscow, the capital, has been attacked, the fact that they're attacking the Amazon of Russia, which is wild berries, and they're trying to
Yeah.
go after ozone, which is the other shipping thing. You get all your things from there. Like when you live in Russia, you want to order. I don't know. You want to order a lights for your studio, you order it from these places. You want to order, a camera or whatever, you order it from these places. It's the same thing as Amazon in the United States. Imagine if somebody bombed all the Amazon factories. People here would freak out. I mean, this is just normal daily life stuff for people. These are things that people don't like. The internet disruptions, the fact that gas is now a problem. How could that possibly be? You have Russia, you produce energy, you have gas. How is this happening? Like what exactly is going on? You have fear. And so what the state does is try to dispel this by saying, no, that's not happening, everything's fine. And that creates in a population just a lot of suspicion and a lot of a lot of kind of just more opposition. And so uh, NATO and the United States will perfectly exploit this to create this sort of instability, further instability in the country, and pressure Russia, and this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people who might be there aren't necessarily talking about it. But I've seen a lot of expats who moved to Russia leave because they can't function. And now there's a thing where you sign away. It's a decree that was recently passed where when you become a citizen of Russia, you have to sign a form that basically says you're willing to fight and go to war. And of course, um, people are not keen on that, right? Because this could last forever now. We don't know how long this is going to last because, as I said, these wars are now part of an ongoing global fight. And so I think there's so much uncertainty right now in Russia as a country, and the focus is always Moscow, St. Petersburg, but the reality is Russia is a massive country with multiple ethnicities, multiple time zones, multiple languages, and it is extremely vulnerable to balkanization, I think, more than ever now, more than ever, because of everything that's happening in West Asia, and because of it losing its influence and its momentum in the war
Yeah.
in Ukraine. So I think after Syria, as you said, that was like the beginning. After Syria fell, we have been seeing other countries fall globally. We've seen Venezuela, we've seen Latin America, and that's
Yeah.
kind of where we're going to into next, right? But we're seeing these one by one. And that's why I reject the idea that the United States empire is losing, because it isn't. It's
Yeah.
winning, and it's winning strategically because I would say it's using what it has and knows best it can use, and because there's been so much naivety coming from Russia. I've witnessed this myself. They still believe, many of them, many of the people in power still believe they can work with the United States. And it's not just Russia, but I've seen it throughout the region in West Asia as well, where people believe they can negotiate, they can still get some sort of sound deal with the United States. And it just doesn't happen. And now with Israel basically being brought into the government of the United States, the defense and tech and intelligence of the United States as a whole,
Yeah.
you're definitely not going to see any sort of, good, respectable deal. You're seeing a takeover. You're witnessing a global multinational class led by the powerful in the United States that are essentially trying to take over the world. And it's not an exaggeration, but that's what it is. And they're basically only competing. They're only looking at China as its ultimate. Um, I would say its ultimate economic power, and Iran, of course, has been a detriment to their attempts, because Iran holds what I don't think any of these powers have, which is the resistance minded
Yeah.
aspect that is missing essentially in Russia. That it is completely not there at all in the government. I think, except in small spurts within um, that initially went in to fight the war in Ukraine, that initially did it for an ideological reason. Besides that, besides the small spurts here and there that want to preserve Russia as a nation for its people, it's mostly missing from them, and that's
Well,
why I think
because
they've also failed.
it's it's effectively part of the global capitalist cabal. It's just on the outside, just as mafias push other families to the outskirts when they're kind of not coming into line and complying with what the most powerful mafia cartels want to happen. That's what I see happening right now. And Russia is trying to, through the fifth columnist, through the oligarchs, many of whom, of course, have been educated in the West, just as is happening in China among the kind of wealthy billionaire class in China. Most of them, their kids are being educated in Yale and Harvard and so on, and then they're coming back to China. So that's kind of what I see happening is that they want a seat at the big table again, And Russia, in my opinion, it's like the Bush-Putin conversation where he talks about it's not a war against terror, it's a war of capital, Jewish capital and Muslim capital, and he picked Jewish capital.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, that was in 2001, but I don't think it's changed. That there isn't, we certainly didn't see in Syria a great love for Muslims. I mean, that was one of the reasons that, again, people probably don't realize there were not that many actual Russian military forces on the ground. Russia was there to provide air cover, and it was Wagner that were conducting many of the ground missions in collaboration with the Syrian army. But it was the Chechens that came in as the military police after areas had been liberated by the Syrian army with Russian drone surveillance to basically be amongst the populations, the majority of which were Muslim. So that was the Chechens were being shipped in. So I could be wrong, please correct me, but I don't think Russia has a great love for Muslim countries.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think if anything, it's quite the opposite, because of the regional ethnic clashing with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of tolerance, and there's a lot of, there's no problem. You have many Muslims in Russia, in Moscow. You have many mosques. It's of course, but in terms of the politics, though, especially the political sector, I would say there isn't. And I think there's also a lack of understanding as to in the population as to
Yeah.
what exactly how far Israel's influence is. And I think it varies by class in Russia, just like it varies by class anywhere.
Mm.
When you have the political elite, they're a lot more tolerable of Israel and its influence. But when you
Yeah.
when you talk to regular people, I think they don't perceive China, Israel as friendly as you would
Mm.
think. They're not super keen on them and the influence and all of that. So I do think that it varies, but um, yeah, there's so much more to talk about in regards to this stuff, but I don't think we intended to really go Russia West
No,
Asia
it
route, but
just. Okay, well, let's drag it back to, well, not drag it, but let's come back to Latin America because, I actually put a post out the other day about Colombia. Of course, Abelardo della Espriella, excuse my pronunciation, I'm going into Italian, um, who is, basically fawning at the feet of Netanyahu and Israel. But we're also, unfortunately, seeing the earthquake in Venezuela has effectively, as it has, of course, in Colombia, it's opened the doors to Israeli military intervention and, in my opinion, occupation.
yeah.
And we've got the Brazil elections coming up in October. And Flavio Bolsonaro, the son of Jair Bolsonaro, will be running as the fascist candidate supported by Trump. So again, we're looking at potentially another right-wing government being brought in that, of course, is going to buy into the Isaac Accords and Zionist influence, if not occupation. So, yeah, I mean, take it away. What's actually happening? What are you seeing on the ground there?
It's quite depressing, to be honest, because what we can even look at the full just we can say the full takeover of Latin America is we're extremely close because if
Mm.
Brazil goes towards Flavio Bolsonaro, who by the way has already opened his campaign, and in his campaign you'll see American, US flags and Israeli flags, and there's a fervent Zionism that came with Jair Bolsonaro during his campaign. I was there when he was running
Right.
for office against Lula da Silva, and you would see the difference in population and class, and also, of course, in politics, where you would see Israeli flags everywhere. And so that's definitely strong in Brazil. So that is an election to watch, I think. The ones to lament, of course, have been the situation in Venezuela, where we have seen Venezuela renounce its years of standing by Chavismo, standing by Chavez, and supporting Palestine by reopening its relationship,
Mm.
its embassy, its consul with Israel, and also, of course, this which the ICC getting out of the ICC began under
Yeah.
Maduro, but I do have to point that out. But there seems to have been a trend, I think mostly made out of trying to not allow the United States in, trying to work and trying to kind of protect itself. I think pressure from the United States that has been happening in Venezuela, and what we're seeing now, the welcoming of Israel, the Israelis setting ground and helping and providing aid to Venezuela has been nothing. I mean, disgusting is an understatement. It's just been absolutely devastating
Yeah.
watching. One of the last holdouts of this sentiment of anti-imperialism, anti-US Western-led capital, really just completely be
Mm.
completely swept away with, in name only, represent the Chavistas, right? And I think a lot of us have seen this happen. We just haven't really we're not it's hard to say. My issue has always been with the assumptions people have made, like, oh, you know, this for sure happened. Delcy Rodriguez did this, and Nicolas Maduro did this, or this person did that. It's like a lot of these things have been set as fact when people just don't know exactly what happened. But what I still see is a nation completely sequestered and blackmailed and completely unable to govern. And there is opposition within the government of what's happening, but they don't know how to exactly get out of it. I don't
Yeah.
think I would have necessarily. I think in the spirit of, of resistance, there isn't room for this sort of strategy where you're gonna give in like this. I think for a lot of people coming from a
Mm.
resistance minded aspect, what Venezuela has done is entirely unacceptable. Like, you, even if you
Yeah.
are dying, you need to resist. You need to fight, even if you have a gun pointed to your head, right? But again, I think that resistance mentality is not so strong in the upper echelons of the government sector of Venezuela. I think that was dwindled as with through the years since Chavez left. And I've heard, many stories about that, many times commenting Maduro is not Chavez. I'm not saying that
Mm.
Maduro is at fault for all of this. I'm not saying that. I am saying that there is a natural progression of things, and we've even seen it in Cuba in terms of the openness of the government
Yeah.
to that wasn't there with Castro, right? Of coming in and opening to business and capital and all of that. But you can do all of that, and it's not going to ever be enough
No,
for the
exactly.
United States. And every time this happens, it always ends up the same. This is why a lot of people say you cannot negotiate. But I mean, I'm not going to sit there and tell, Venezuelans that they needed to sacrifice themselves and fight, because, I don't want to say that. But I do think that what we're seeing here is proving all sorts of things. That, number one, that the United States holds a lot of power right now in Venezuela. 500,000 barrels, 50%
Yeah.
of Venezuela's oil is going, per Reuters, is going to the United States, whereas last year it was only a smaller percentage. And Venezuela is not going to see the billions of profit made off of this. So that's, on that end, that's what we're seeing. And with the earthquake, that I still don't believe, I believe is extremely timely. Um, we
Mm.
are seeing more vulnerability now for Venezuela, more need
Yeah.
to have the United States, Israel come in, rescue them, NATO, all of these very, very, these CIA cutouts, these NGOs, these
Yeah.
agencies that are there to basically exploit and disaster capitalism. And in Colombia, a month and a half later, the same thing happened. There was a massive
Exactly.
7.4 earthquake that devastated some of the more poor and economically vulnerable areas of Colombia, in Cali. And hundreds of people are dead. And of course, who swoops in to save the day now with the, very, very right-wing president in Colombia is Israel. Israel shows up,
Mm.
and Abelardo de Espriella says that he wasn't going to accept aid from anybody that wasn't the United States, Israel, and I think one other country.
Yeah.
So only those states could accept aid, only those. And then he, of course, recognized Israel's
Oh, the Golan.
sovereignty over the Golan, which it was so quick, by the way he did this. And then he thanked Israel for all their help. And I don't know if you guys know this, but Abelardo de Espriella is a U.S. citizen. He was living in the U.S. He was a lawyer in the U.S., made his money mostly
Mm.
off of being a lawyer in Miami, of course, Miami. And his children and wife, like, they all lived in the US, so they literally just came to Colombia to win an election. He has worked defending drug traffickers. So when we are told that, he's going to get rid of the drug traffickers, he's going to do all of this, it's the same story. The drug traffickers are, are
Mm.
being used as the terrorists,
The narco terrorists.
excess. Yeah, exactly. And
Mm.
so this is the same strategy. It's just changed in name. And the United States and Israel have effectively taken over Latin America. And you're seeing it in Colombia, you're seeing it through the use of the cartels, right? And they're the thing is, it's not just random candidates. These are hand selected by the United States. Abelardo Despriella is so pro-Trump that he voted in the United States. This is, I mean, should this be allowed? Should you like, it's just seems uncanny to me. I mean, I'm not, I have double citizenship, but the thing it's just, I have such a problem with somebody, like, if I went and I grew up in the United States and I went to Peru and I ran for president and I didn't live there at all and I didn't know anything and I just ran, like, I lived my whole life in the US and I was a lawyer and I was clearly very pro-Trump, and then I went and I ran for office. The fact, like,
Supported
it's
by
so
Trump.
obvious, supported by Trump vocally. I wouldn't consider that a fair election. And I mean, just on that surface alone, right? And so there's already U.S. military bases planned in Colombia. There's already, of course, the reopening of relations. That's already a done deal. There's already the refocusing on drug trafficking in Colombia, which is going to create more violence, more chaos for the country. And so,
Well, and create the environment for more US military to come in. But I think also Colombia withdrew from the ICC case against Israel. That was also
yeah,
part of the deal, right?
yeah, they're also doing that. So, I mean, in that short time, in the last few months, we have seen the progress that was made in terms of having, countries that were allied against the Donroe Doctrine now fully just turn so quickly. And of course, Peru, being one of the last that's already ignited in protest because the price of oil has surged. And so there have been massive protests against the new president, Keiko Fujimori. Peru has already said that they are not just going to work with Israel, but they're fully open to negotiating intelligence aid from Israel. So, is there anywhere left? I mean, not really. I mean, you really
Not
basically
really.
have Brazil's election, and then Cuba is again extremely vulnerable. It's a matter of
Well,
time.
especially having lost Venezuela effectively, which were there, mutually they supported each other. But I think what's also interesting is Gustave Petro putting out the accusation that it was basically the Mossad operation Black Cube that fixed the election for the right-wing government to come in. And they've already been accused
Yeah,
of operating in Paraguay, I think, Uruguay, other Latin American countries, and definitely in the
in Europe
Balkans, in
too.
Europe. Yeah, Slovenia, Hungary, Bulgaria
Yeah,
from memory, Albania. So they're
yeah,
operating, and if it's not Black Cube, and then it's Black Core, there's a whole kind of complex of them basically fixing elections and ensuring that fascist governments come to power that are then going to open the door on multiple levels to Zionist entry into the country.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think in Colombia was specifically, I think they named Black Core, and like for
No, Black
me,
Cube.
what
It was Black
oh,
Cube, I think.
it was Black Cube.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Black Core is kind of shut down after they were not shut down, but their website disappeared and so on. But I think I'm pretty certain it was Black Cube because that's the more kind of dominant one now that's
Mhm.
operating.
It's all the same type of
Yeah,
Israeli firm. Yeah,
yeah,
ultimately. But and it's funny the name, right? Like like
yeah,
this darkness like coming in meddling in elections, but
exactly. Yeah,
it's true. And so when I'm looking at what's happening is I'm seeing that they're trying to get to the point where it matters less on who's in power because they're all coming from the same power structure, right? So you have Abelardo de Espriella, you have Keiko Fujimori, you could have what's his name, Flavio Bolsonaro, you have Javier Milei in Argentina. And these are all yes, different countries, but are they sovereign anymore? If their policies are going to be reflected from the United States and Zionists. If their policies are all, if you have Abelardo de Espriella that basically voted, lived in the United States, took photos with the Secretary of State, and all of these people that want to basically flip Latin America and take it over, does that constitute sovereignty? Does it constitute sovereignty if Venezuela no longer has the ability to make decisions for itself and its wealth is being exported out of the country? No. So are these actual, are they governing anything? No, they're puppets. So what we're seeing is they're placing their puppets everywhere now, and these puppets now are going to be representing governments, but ultimately it is like a one world government. That's the overarching goal that we're seeing here down the line. And with the increase of these data centers, where they're using massive amounts of energy for AI and to build all of this information, and with the increasing of surveillance with these cameras, the flock cameras that everybody has been freaking out about, because they massively, they can find you, anybody, so quickly, that I think it's not only impossible to have privacy or anything, but it's impossible, then it will become impossible to resist against that, because they will know exactly, they are criminalizing resistance. So this is now not just a problem for people abroad, and this is, I think, what people in the Western world need to understand. This is a problem for people within even Western governments, because that essentially, they're almost done neo-colonizing everything. I mean, the only, as we've said and been saying, the only resistance they have is Iran and the axis of resistance. Besides that, they're not really having much resistance at all, or ability to resist. Then once, if they succeed, and this is why so many people put so much faith in Iran, then that's it. The only people that can resist are going to be, from within the populations, and that's going to be difficult because the mechanisms are already set in place to curtail that, right? And this is why you guys, people hate us, because they're talking about like Skynet, essentially, and how do you resist that? You try. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's basically the Gaza model, which we've been talking about for ages, is going to become a global model for the control of any resistance within domestic populations. And that is now becoming a reality, because I don't believe that AI data centers are only for the storage of AI data. I think there's something far more sinister going on. And the thing is that then when you start to look at AI, well, everyone's in on it. And China is actually leading the charge. Right? So it becomes very difficult to separate any of those extremely powerful countries like China from that one world government, because they're all going to be competing for supremacy within that sphere. And the thing is, where I have a problem is where people talk about, well, the AI data centers that China is potentially installing on the seabed, or but they're good AI data centers. Apparently, they don't do any harm. I always like, no, that doesn't work like that. Just because you have an Israeli data center or a US data center or a UK data center, they're all bad. But when China does it, it's good. No, the overall effect is the same.
Yeah.
You can't tell me, that just doesn't work for me. The thing is, it's kind of like the arms race. It's the race to nuclear armament. It's the space race. It's the AI race. That's it.
Yeah.
And kind of, I was reading, actually, there's a couple of really good Substack accounts. Actually, I'll link to them. They often have papers by Chinese academics or Chinese engineers, AI specialists, and so on. No, China is totally heading down this road of AI. And, borderline transhumanism. It's so, I think we have to be aware of that. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that necessarily China's on a level of kind of psychopathic neocolonialism like the US and definitely like Israel and no, I wouldn't. They're out there as far as that is concerned, but nevertheless, I don't think there's a huge degree of empathy for humanity in Chinese policy or in Russian policy of securing spheres of influence and global capitalist power bases globally. And, you know, we are on our own. And I think the sooner that we actually recognize that we're on our own alongside the resistance in this region, alongside Iran, because as you've said, Iran is the only country, in my opinion, that is fighting an ideological war.
Hmm. Yeah, that effectively the only ones. And
Now
yeah,
that we've lost
I
Latin America, certainly.
yeah, I mean, not fully, but
No, but
it's
we're
getting there.
close
And I
to.
hate to be negative, but even if Brazil holds out, you have Lula da Silva, who is at best a liberal, right? So
Mm.
he's gonna play ball wherever it is. I mean, it's so
Well,
I
if he's more
honestly,
isolated, then of course he's going to. If he hasn't got support from Colombia or Venezuela, then you know what I mean.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have some holdouts in Mexico, but Mexico is extremely vulnerable to the United States. Its economy is
Yeah.
heavily tied, and so they're just their hands are tied in a sense. It's already a done deal. Then you look at Central America, where you have Nicaragua as the last stand there. They're extremely surrounded by everybody that's basically the United States
Mm.
and their proxies. So that's only a matter of time. That's also next year. That's next year.
Mm.
So yeah, I fully think we're heading in that direction, and it's hard to say that any AI or technocratic takeover is going to be better than the other. Ultimately, when you strip humanity out of the equation, when you put in profits, and people say, well, China is not, capitalist. It's like, they're practicing capitalism very well at a global level. Even if at a government level, that's not what their institutional government is doing. At an economic level, that's what they're doing. They're doing really well in a capitalist world. So when you have that, it's impossible to say that that level of power is not going to be corrupted in one form or another.
Mm.
And if that were the case, China wouldn't have an elite class of people, and it does. So,
Mm.
like, those are realities we have to face, I think.
I mean, the other reality, and for me, this is kind of empowering. I think once you recognize that reality and you recognize that this war is not going to be kind of, well, here's the start and here's the end. It's going to be, for a very long time now, a very long, convoluted, and drawn out war. And at the same time as that is happening and ongoing, the pauses and the breaks in that war are going to be used to turn against domestic populations. And I think, honestly, rather than worrying about the long war to some degree, people have to start preparing for the incoming war against them, which is going to come in multiple disguises. And, in Italy, we are seeing a real pushback in the various provinces where Israel is trying to actually establish settlements from the population. So there is still resistance. And I think with awareness comes the ability to resist and push back at the point that we still have the power to push back. Because if we keep waiting and we keep believing in Russia as a savior, China as a savior, BRICS as a savior, then we're just delaying the point at which we have to actually start taking action ourselves to protect ourselves, our families, our loved ones, our communities, and build those communities, because it's the communities. When you're isolated, you're vulnerable. When you have a real community, you're far less vulnerable. And so for me, I kind of see it. I mean, here we're in the middle of it all. There's not a huge amount that we can do. But in the West, there is still this window of opportunity for people to start preparing for it in whatever way that they see fit. And yeah, people are going to say, oh, you're just conspiracy theorizing and, you're asking us to become preppers and all the rest of it. Well, no, not really. I'm just saying, do what you feel is going to protect your family, your community, your humanity, basically. And so, again, I was talking to John Helmer about this, and the fact that I don't really get fazed anymore by the ugliness of the world we live in. It's become, have I become inured to it? No, I don't think so. It still upsets me. It still really makes me angry. It still is something very sinister. But I think when you know exactly the size of the monster you're facing, the power of the monster you're facing, you can face it. You can devise a strategy. So I'm sorry, guys, if we do appear to black pill you, but actually that really isn't what we're intending to do. We're actually trying to kind of, even for ourselves, I guess, lift the veils that lead to inaction and inattention and to some degree apathy on the part of people, and empower everyone to actually start recognizing the threat and dealing with it.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I think that's enough for today. I guess enough of the black pilling, of the lifting the veil, of but yeah, so thank you all for tuning in. Vanessa, anything you want to say before we head out?
No, just welcome back, Fee. It's been a while and I always really enjoy talking with you. So thank you. And I hope the audience enjoyed it also.
Yes. I hope you all enjoyed, and we'll see you soon, hopefully. All right.
Oh,
Take
and
care.
like and subscribe and share.
Oh, yeah.
Please. We're hopeless.
Please, yes. Do all the things that you need to do, like double like. Please and thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Take care. Bye.